Hi, it's Katrina. Pluto's Gate. The Plutonion at Hierapolis, also known as Pluto's Gate, was a temple dedicated to Pluto, the Roman god of death and ruler of the underworld. Ancient writings describe this place as a portal to the underworld filled with lethal vapors. People once gathered at the temple and watched as bulls were led into a cave to their deaths, a sacrifice to the hungry god. The creatures' pained screams could be heard until they fell to the floor with a thud and thereafter went silent, allegedly proving that Pluto's breath had killed them. The Greek geographer Strabo wrote, "This space is full of a vapor so misty and dense that one can scarcely see the ground. Any animal that passes inside meets instant death." Until relatively recently, experts didn't know how animals died at Pluto's Gate, where ancient people believed their deaths were the handiwork of the gods themselves. Only the eunuchs of Cybele, an ancient fertility goddess, were able to enter the Hell Gate without any apparent damage. The temple was built on a cave system that released toxic gases to the surface, so the ancients believed that this must be the passage to the underworld or the gate to hell itself. Located in modern-day Turkey, the religious site was rediscovered in 1965 by Italian archaeologists and was further explored in more recent decades. Nobody knows exactly how old Pluto's Gate is, but the nearby ancient ruins of Hierapolis date back to roughly 190 BC. Archaeologists observed that the conditions near the cave remain deadly to this day, noting that birds sometimes fly by and suffocate from the toxic fumes. The cave at Pluto's Gate can only fit one person. A set of stairs leads downward to the area where carbon dioxide emits from underground. In the past, visitors were not allowed to get too close to the entrance, but were encouraged to purchase birds and release them into an enclosed area nearby, so they could see for themselves that Pluto's breath really did kill anything that went near it. Pilgrims would come from all around and sit in the hot pools around the temple, sleeping near the cave. The fumes from the groundwater would produce hallucinations and visions. The cave was closed off and forbidden after the arrival of Christianity, which condemned the worship of Pluto. Then an earthquake destroyed the temple completely sometime during the 6th century. Today the site lies in ruins. Archaeologists announced in 2017 that they hope to eventually open the property to visitors, but the fatal cave entrance makes it a dangerous place for now. Bhangarh Fort. Located in Rajasthan, the Bhangarh Fort is considered one of the most haunted places in India. There are signs everywhere prohibiting visitors from visiting there after dark. You must leave at sunset and return at sunrise, or something bad might happen to you. It was built by a local ruler for his son Madho Singh in 1573 and once stood as an architectural marvel. During ancient times, it was a flourishing town consisting of as many as 10,000 residents. The sprawling fort complex includes various temples, public chambers, marketplaces, and mansions, as well as a royal palace. There are several old myths surrounding what happened to Bhangarh Fort. One version holds that an extremely austere religious man called Ascetic cursed the site after he realized that it was so big it would cast a shadow on his property. Back in the day, that was completely unacceptable, since shadows on your home are bad luck and symbolized overpowering your property. Another story claims that a magician cursed the fort after he attempted to win over the heart of a local princess and failed. He tried to use a love potion, but she threw it onto a boulder that then rolled down the hill and crushed him. Before he died, he cursed the place. There are some newer legends also, several of which involve fatal accidents taking place at the fort. Interestingly, the Archaeological Survey of India banned visitors from entering between sunrise and sunset, but people still spend the night to see what kind of adventure awaits. Spirits are rumored to roam the fort at night, and people have reported hearing very strange noises, a feeling of being watched, and that the air feels very heavy. Would you want to spend the night in this haunted place? Let me know in the comments below. Superconducting Super Collider. Nicknamed the Desertron, the Superconducting Super Collider, or the SSC, was a planned particle accelerator complex in Texas that never came to be. It would have had over 20 times more energy than any other accelerator and would have made the United States the dominant power in high-energy physics. Right now, that's the Large Hadron Collider at the CERN laboratory in Switzerland. This one in Texas was supposed to be the biggest and the best, measuring 54.1 miles in circumference if the project had come to fruition. Construction began in 1991 and stopped just 2 years later after spending $2 billion and building 14 miles of tunnel. Congress had agreed to help fund the particle accelerator's development during its planning stages, at which time they were told the structure could be built for $4.4 billion. By 1993, projected costs had skyrocketed to over $8 billion. causing investors to lose confidence in the project. In a report, the Inspector General from the Department of Energy, a major financial contributor to the project, criticized the Super Collider's officials for poor management and high costs. Despite this, then-President Bill Clinton tried to prevent the cancellation of the SSC. Congress ignored him and revoked federal funding, and the Super Collider project came to a screeching halt. The property changed hands several times in the following years. Some tunnels were flooded to retain stability, while others were locked up and left as is. Meanwhile, the site became a hotspot for trespassers, mainly criminals and hardcore partiers. More recently, an oil field product manufacturer called Magna Blend took over the buildings, and much of the leftover tunnels have been filled in. The whole area is now completely off-limits to anyone who doesn't belong there. Poveglia. Located in northern Italy's Venetian lagoon, less than a half-mile from Venice, Poveglia is a small island with a history of hundreds of years of suffering. Early on, its residents would often have to flee to escape attack. Then, starting in 1776, Poveglia was used as a quarantine station for plague victims and sufferers of other diseases before becoming a mental hospital in 1922. The island has been vacant since the insane asylum closed in 1968, despite efforts in recent years to lease it as a luxury vacation spot. But don't be fooled. Rumors claim that as much as half the soil on Poveglia contains human remains, left behind by the more than 160,000 sick people who died there. Archaeologists have found mass graves containing the remains of thousands of plague victims on nearby islands, but Poveglia itself has yet to be fully investigated. According to legend, a doctor who worked at the mental hospital in Poveglia tortured and killed patients. While these claims remain unsubstantiated, the remains of the hospital are still there, slowly being reclaimed by nature. How would this be a luxury hotspot? The show Ghost Adventures went to the island and got quite the scare. Their equipment picked up all kinds of bangs, footsteps, strange voices, and even orbs of light floating around. Many paranormal enthusiasts believe Poveglia is haunted, but the island currently remains off-limits to visitors, and there is no word on if or when it will open up to tourism. Plus, who wants to risk getting the plague? For now, those who are curious about the supernatural can visit the nearby island of San Servolo, where the remains of an insane asylum are preserved as a museum. Six Flags New Orleans. When Hurricane Katrina hit in 2005, it had a detrimental impact on New Orleans, submerging roughly 80% of the city, including the local Six Flags theme park. First opened in 2000, the amusement park was relatively new when disaster struck. It has stood abandoned ever since. The damages caused by Hurricane Katrina, I swear it wasn't me, were just too extensive to be worth repairing, and Six Flags' lease on the property was terminated when the company went bankrupt. The Industrial Development Board of New Orleans currently owns the site, but has not redeveloped it yet. They're just waiting for the right project, I guess. Today, the 142-acre park sits in ruins and is getting slowly taken over by nature. It's overgrown with plant life and infested with wild animals, including alligators, making it unsafe for people to visit. But this doesn't stop adventure seekers from going there to explore, and all kinds of suspicious activity and graffiti can be found all over the rundown buildings and rides. In fact, trespassing is so problematic that the New Orleans Police Department had to dispatch extra security to the site to keep people out of there. In 2019, New Orleans Mayor LaToya Cantrell proposed demolishing the park, citing that its condition is a disturbance to nearby residents. No official word has been given on whether the city will follow through with the proposed plan. Aralsk 7. The Aral Sea region was once home to over 1,500 islands until the Soviet Union started draining it, using it to water the desert in the hopes of being able to grow food. Then pesticides, weapons testing, and who knows what else caused everything to die. The lake got extremely salty and practically disappeared. The dry, desolate landscape is home to what was once Vozrozdenia Island, a 77-square-mile island that sat in the Aral Sea before it dried up. The terrifying place was the former site of a top-secret Soviet biological weapons testing site. Known as Aralsk 7, the facility tested numerous highly dangerous bioweapons, including anthrax, smallpox, plague, brucellosis, and tularemia. The site was designed for testing the effects of deadly diseases in preparation for World War III. Not surprisingly, Aralsk 7 was a dangerous place, but you didn't necessarily need to go there to be exposed to its hazards. In 1971, an accidental release of weaponized smallpox infected 10 people, killing 3 of them. A mass vaccination ensued, and around 50,000 nearby residents were inoculated, but the incident was kept largely hidden from the general public until 2002. When the Soviet Union fell in 1991, Aralsk 7 was closed, and its 1,500 residents were evacuated quickly. Within 24 hours, the majority of Russian soldiers were gone, leaving behind equipment, buildings, trucks, cars, and documents. Today, the site is littered with the remains of the island's abandoned structures. Everything else was buried underground. Because many of the dangerous biological weapons that were created and tested there were not stored or destroyed properly, several of the containers holding them have sprung leaks, making it extremely dangerous for anyone to go there. 10 anthrax burial sites have been decontaminated so far as part of an ongoing effort to clean up the area. It cannot be found on any map, although now Uzbekistan is hoping to open this former secret location to tourists, but they have a lot of work to do. It's a 200-mile drive through the desert with no water or cell phone signal, and then when you get there, biological dangers are lurking around every corner. Locals are still very afraid of the place. Randall Park Mall. Shopping malls aren't doing so great. This includes the Randall Park Mall in North Randall, Ohio, which closed in 2009 amid increasing competition with internet-based retailers like Amazon. Randall Park Mall opened in 1976 during a mall building boom. It housed big-name stores like Sears, JCPenney, a bunch of stores nobody remembers, and a movie theater. For a short time after opening, it was the world's largest mall. The mall began to decline in 1994, following the death of its developer, Edward J. DeBartolo. From there on out, it struggled to maintain sufficient occupancy and was dealt a further blow with the advent of online shopping. Meanwhile, the mall changed ownership several times, and in 2004 it sold for $6 million, just 15% of its total construction costs. In 2007, the mall closed. At the time, its owners owed over $200,000 in back taxes and had taken out multiple mortgages on the property. All the remaining stores closed by March 12, 2009, and the mall's power supply was cut off 2 months later. Meanwhile, curious explorers made their way into the building to see its seemingly post-apocalyptic state and to use it for parties and shelter. Photographer and local Seth Lawless remembers walking around the mall with his parents and then later hanging out there as a teenager. He took incredibly sad images of the mall slowly decaying. The mall has since been demolished, and ironically, an Amazon facility was built in its place in 2018. Georgia Nuclear Aircraft Laboratory. Located in Georgia's Dawson Forest, the Georgia Nuclear Aircraft Laboratory, also known as the Air Force Plant 67, or AFP-67, is a former United States Air Force testing facility that also served as Lockheed's lab for testing nuclear aircraft. Built during the early 1950s, the remote site was used for irradiating military equipment with the goal of determining whether developing a nuclear-powered airplane was a realistic goal. The facility's nuclear reactor was unshielded, requiring employees to retreat into underground bunkers whenever it was turned on. All the trees in the forest reportedly lost their leaves from the radiation. The aircraft laboratory was closed down and dismantled in 1971, and most of what went on there remains top secret to this day. All that's left of the facility are the concrete pilings and husks that were left behind, as well as the building's foundation and one smaller building. Parts of the site remain fenced off, still inaccessible to the general public as they were when they were in use. The underground tunnels and bunkers that housed personnel when the reactor was in use were filled in, but people continue to search for them. Thankfully, there is no detectable radiation at the site. Vercelli Psychiatric Hospital. Built in the early 1930s, the Vercelli Psychiatric Hospital was once one of Italy's largest insane asylums. The sprawling complex occupied nearly 70 acres and consisted of 20 pavilions, at least 13 of which are completely abandoned today, as well as a small church. Inside some of the pavilions were a gymnasium, an auditorium, a children's area, and an area for patients' relatives. One area, known as the Carlo Forlanini Pavilion, housed the most severely mentally ill patients in small rooms. They had to go through experimental treatments such as electroconvulsive therapy, which took place in the basement. During World War II, retaliating partisans massacred a group of fascist soldiers at the site. The Bassaglia Law, which required the dismantling of Italy's mental hospitals, went into effect in 1978, causing the facility to close. Several pavilions were turned into a regular hospital, which remained in operation until 1991. The local health authority manages but does not use the property, and the area that remains in use now houses an environmental association office. Would you want your office to be at an abandoned insane asylum? French photographer and urban explorer Sylvain Margain gained access to the off-limits buildings in 2015 and snapped pictures of the decrepit, dust-covered ruins. Humidity has destroyed the walls, plaster is crumbling, and thick vegetation has taken over the once manicured yard. Objects like wheelchairs, books, medical paperwork, and psychiatry magazines remain as an eerie reminder of the past in the now dark and silent buildings. The Goddess of Death. The Goddess of Death statue was originally named the Woman of Lem because of the small town where it was discovered on the island nation of Cyprus. The statue was unearthed in 1878, and most experts agree that it dates back at least 3,000 years. The Woman of Lem became known as the Goddess of Death after those who owned the statue either died or experienced unimaginable suffering almost immediately after acquiring it. The statue was first created thousands of years ago to depict an ancient fertility goddess, probably by an ancient civilization living in the Mediterranean. After it was dug out of the ground, a British colonial named Lord Elfont got his hands on the relic. Unfortunately for him, he and 6 members of his family died under mysterious circumstances within just a few years of obtaining the cursed relic. The next owner was a man named Ivor Manucci, and his entire family was dead within just a couple of years of coming into contact with the Goddess of Death. The same thing then happened to the third owner of the statue, a man named Lord Thompson Knoll. He and his whole family were dead in a handful of years. The last private owner of the statue was a guy named Sir Alan Biverbrook, and he died with his wife and his 2 daughters after buying the cursed object. This left his sons to care for the obviously dangerous artifact. But instead of risking their lives, they donated it to the Royal Museum in Edinburgh, Scotland. Unfortunately, when the museum decided to put the statue on display, the curator who physically touched the artifact and put it in its case died shortly thereafter. And since then, the Goddess of Death has remained safely behind glass. Anna Baker's wedding dress. In 1936, a mansion in Pennsylvania was purchased by Elias Baker. Baker moved his family into the mansion, including his eldest daughter, Anna. Anna ended up falling in love with an impoverished steel worker, and Elias forbade her from being with him because this was the 1830s and fathers had much more control over their daughters' lives. But Anna ended up going behind her father's back, and she and the young steel worker planned a secret wedding. She even purchased a wedding dress for the occasion. Unfortunately for Anna, her father found out about it and, using his wealth and influence, had the steelworker moved out of the city. As you can imagine, Anna was devastated. She refused to marry any other man, and she locked herself in her room inside the estate, and every day she could see her unused wedding dress hanging in the closet. Legend goes that Anna died an old woman in that very room, still angry at her father for separating her from the steelworker. And also, according to legend, all of Anna's anger was transferred to her wedding dress after her death, and those who would dare to put the wedding dress on are said to suffer from hallucinations. The wedding dress was eventually placed inside of a glass case to keep Anna's spirit from haunting the mansion. It can still be seen today in Anna's former home, now known as the Baker's Museum. Letta the Gypsy Doll. Letta the Gypsy Doll was apparently created by a Romanian gypsy for his son. After crafting the doll by hand and giving it to his son to play with, the boy began to complain that the doll was speaking to him. Shortly after, the boy drowned in a river while playing with the doll, and it's been said that the spirit of the boy became trapped in the toy while he was drowning, turning it into one of the strangest cursed objects in the world. It's been dubbed Letta Me Out in recent years due to the belief that the boy's spirit possesses the doll. It's currently owned by a man named Kerry Walton, an Australian who purchased the peculiar artifact over 40 years ago. Kerry claims that when he first brought the doll home, his children would wake up in the night crying hysterically, screaming that the doll had been speaking to them. Over the years, the same thing has happened to others who have come into contact with the doll. Some say it moves, some say it speaks, and Kerry Walton even claims that when he takes the doll outside of the house, it begins to rain. Why would you want to keep this in the house? Wouldn't you be scared? Do you have something like this already? Let me know in the comments below. King Tut's Curse. In November 1922, a team of archaeologists led by Howard Carter made history when they discovered the tomb of the lost Egyptian pharaoh Tutankhamun. Famously known as King Tut, he ruled during the 14th century BC. The tomb had been sealed for 3,000 years and contained countless treasures and historical artifacts. But some believed that opening the tomb would unleash a powerful and deadly curse. And wouldn't you know, 2 months after the team opened King Tut's tomb, the man who financed much of the expedition, Lord Carnarvon, died from a bacterial infection. Supposedly, he accidentally cut open a mosquito bite while shaving that got infected. Rumors started spreading that it was the mummy's curse and that King Tut was angry. So far as the legend goes, those who interrupted the tomb of King Tut would succumb to death and destruction, and Lord Carnarvon was not the only one. Howard Carter gave his friend Sir Bruce Ingham a mummified hand as a gift, and Ingham's house then burned to the ground. He tried to rebuild it, and then it was flooded. Then there was George J. Gould, who visited the tomb in 1923 and got sick just days later, then died from pneumonia. The list of deaths and disasters goes on, and it's never actually been confirmed just how many people died or suffered serious loss in the first few years following King Tut's tomb being opened. A British archaeologist, Hugh Evelyn White, who helped to excavate Tut's tomb, strongly believed in the curse after seeing almost 24 of his fellow excavators die of strange causes. He committed suicide 2 years after King Tut's tomb was discovered, leaving behind a note that said, "I have succumbed to a curse which forces me to disappear." However, Howard Carter, the main archaeologist on the project, went on to live a full life, dying many years later at the age of 64. It's unclear whether the curse did affect him in some way or another that was just never reported, or if he truly did manage to escape King Tut's curse. The Hope Diamond. The Hope Diamond might just be the most valuable cursed artifact in the entire world. The legend goes that whoever owns the Hope Diamond will experience bad luck and an unforgiving death. But you don't just have to own the diamond. Even if you touch it, the curse can still cause you great misery. The diamond has a very long history and is one of the most famous jewels in the world. It's a stunning blue diamond weighing 45.52 carats. It originally came from the Kolar mine in India, and the earliest records show that it was purchased in 1666. It was given to King Louis XIV and then stolen during the French Revolution. The exact tale of how the diamond made it to France in the first place is quite a bit more complicated. The story goes that an explorer named Jean-Baptiste Tavernier apparently stole the diamond from the forehead of a statue depicting the Hindu goddess Sita, and for his wrongdoing, the diamond was cursed. Tavernier was then mauled to death by wild dogs after stealing and selling the diamond, and afterwards every single person who owned the diamond met a brutal and violent end. It became known as the Hope Diamond when the Hope family from London bought it and had the stone recut to make it more sparkly. Interestingly, the stone will glow red when exposed to ultraviolet light, fueling the story of it being cursed. A socialite named Evelyn Walsh McLean often wore the diamond as a necklace. Her husband bought it for her from Cartier in 1911. Her friends and mother-in-law heard rumors of the curse and urged her to sell it back to Cartier, but they said no. Fun fact, Evelyn also owned another 94-carat diamond known as the Star of the East. Harry Winston Diamonds then purchased the Hope Diamond and later gave it to the National Museum of Natural History, where it remains on display. Annabelle. Annabelle is much more than just an extremely creepy doll in a movie. The movie franchise is actually based on a real Annabelle doll that is a lot less intimidating looking, but every bit as terrifying. The real Annabelle doll is simply a Raggedy Ann doll that doesn't look dangerous or menacing at all. It's a soft child's toy with red hair and a frilly white gown. Apparently, the doll was purchased from a hobby store back in 1970 from a mother as a gift for a young woman named Donna. But after receiving the doll, strange things began to happen. Donna would arrive home to find the doll in bizarre positions around the house. It would magically appear in different rooms, even when the door was shut, and sometimes the doll would even be found sitting with its legs crossed and its arms folded, as if waiting for something to happen. One day, Donna came home to find a red substance on the doll's hand and chest that undeniably looked like blood. The mysterious occurrences went on for about a year before paranormal researchers and Ed and Lorraine Warren got involved with the case. They eventually took the doll from Donna and locked it inside of a glass case and essentially tossed away the key. They came to the conclusion that the doll was possessed by some kind of evil demon. It's not clear where the demon first came from or how it even came to possess the doll, but it has been claimed that the doll was responsible for at least one death. Apparently, a man once entered the occult museum where the doll is currently kept, looked straight at it, and then challenged it to do its worst. 3 hours after leaving the museum, the man supposedly lost control of his motorcycle, hit a tree, and died. Do you believe in the curse? Do you like dolls, or do you think they're creepy? Let me know in the comments below. The Anguished Man. The Anguished Man is a famous oil painting believed to be one of the most haunted things in the entire world. The legend states that the Anguished Man was created by an unknown artist, and apparently it was crafted with paint mixed with the artist's own blood. After the work was completed, the artist took his own life. Today, the Anguished Man is owned by a man named Sean Robinson in England. He inherited the painting from his grandmother, who warned him to be careful because the painting is cursed. Would you accept a painting like this? I don't think so. After taking the painting home, Robinson's wife did not like the look of it, so she forced him to keep it in the basement. But after the basement flooded in 2010, Robinson was forced to take the Anguished Man and put it upstairs. Well, forced? I mean, he could have just gotten rid of it. Almost immediately after, Robinson would wake up in the night to see a dark figure standing faceless in his bedroom. His wife too woke up in the middle of the night to find a horribly disfigured person sleeping on the bed next to her. Both have since been severely traumatized by the painting. The Curse of the Terracotta Army. The Terracotta warriors were discovered when a team of Chinese farmers were digging a well in a village in 1974. They stumbled upon what would become one of the largest archaeological discoveries in modern times. This was the Terracotta Army, a priceless collection of statues built 2,200 years ago to protect the first emperor of China during his journey into the afterlife. However, that's where the good news ended for the villagers. They felt like they were punished for what they had found. Their farmland was almost immediately seized by the government. Then their homes were demolished to make way for the gift shops and the tourist center. The village, which itself was about 2,000 years old, was destroyed. According to an in-depth report from the Daily Mail, in the end, almost all the men involved in finding the famous army died in their early 50s, with no jobs and no money. While millions of tourists, lots of businesses, and uncounted dollars have flowed through the area since the discovery, the villagers were practically obliterated. The Haunted Mirror. In Louisiana, there is a place called the Myrtles Plantation, and it is believed to be one of the most haunted homes in all of the United States. There are dozens of horrifying legends surrounding this plantation and its more than 200-year-old history. However, there is one particular object that is believed to be more cursed than anything else in the house. It's known as the Haunted Mirror because of the mysterious handprints that seem to be coming from behind the glass. The legend states that a slave named Chloe poisoned 3 members of the Woodruff family by sneaking toxic ingredients into a cake. The lady of the plantation was killed along with her 2 daughters, and somehow all 3 of them got stuck inside of the old mirror. Visitors to the Myrtles Plantation have reported seeing handprints on the glass that apparently belong to the 3 dead Woodruff women who are still stuck inside the mirror. Other people report seeing a curious residue along the edges of the mirror that has been unidentifiable and uncleanable. And finally, visitors claim that sometimes there are people inside the mirror wearing old-fashioned clothing. It's not sure what exactly the curse entails or why the women are stuck in the mirror, but many people definitely believe that their souls will be trapped inside of it forever. The Cursed Tomb. In 1973, archaeologists opened perhaps the second most cursed tomb in the entire world. This was the tomb of the Polish king Casimir IV Jagiellon, found in Krakow, Poland. Several archaeologists involved in the excavation of the tomb died shortly after it was opened. Media agencies immediately began to link the devastation involved with the king's tomb with what happened 50 years prior in Egypt, when many of those involved with Howard Carter's archaeological team passed away after opening King Tut's tomb. But in the case of the Polish king, he hadn't been buried for nearly as long as the Egyptian pharaoh. He had only been resting inside of his tomb for 500 years. Interestingly enough, when the excavations began, archaeologists were worried that the tomb may have been pillaged by the Russians during World War II, just as the Russians had done with many other royal tombs throughout Poland. The king had been buried inside the chapel of Wawel Castle after his death in 1492, and finally the world would see what kind of treasures the man had been buried with. But unfortunately, the only treasures seemed to be more of a curse than a blessing. After a couple of days, 4 members of the 12-person dig team died from infections and strokes. And then, over the course of the next few years, no less than 15 people who worked closely with the tomb died simply from coming into contact with the remains of the dead Polish king. The mysterious Kapilikaya tomb. High up in the hills in the Turkish countryside is a mysterious door that looks like it is carved right into the mountain. It is actually the entrance to a tomb hidden inside the mountain, cut into the rock face. Someone was definitely buried here, and they were likely very important, but archaeologists have no idea who it was or where their body disappeared to. Known as the Kapilikaya tomb, it is not actually a door, but an entire tomb, carved into the shape of a cube with just a few points where it still remains connected to the rock. There is a small platform with stairs in front, but there is no easy access today. A very steep trail winds up the other side of the mountain, so it is possible if you are up for a tough climb. To reach the grave part of the tomb, you have to enter by a little opening set high up in the face of the cliff. It looks like there was once a rope that you could climb down, but it's long gone. Above the entrance to the cave, an inscription reads Ikesios, though if that's a clue to who was once here, or just graffiti by a past visitor, it's unclear. Not a lot is known about it other than it dates back to the Hellenistic period, or the 2nd century BC. Locals have reported that there is no excavation going on, and it seems like no one knows anything else about it. However, at the back of the tomb there is a broken rock from where grave robbers entered the cave space around the cube to try to get in, probably in search of treasure. However, it's unknown if any treasure was ever found, since the grave part of the tomb was completely empty upon its official discovery, which nobody really knows when that was either. Whoever was there has been forgotten, and now the front of the cave tomb is covered in graffiti. Since it is close to the local town, who knows how many people just go there to hang out? Is there any spot like this near where you live? Maybe a historical place that all the locals know about but outsiders don't? Let me know in the comments below. The mysterious Cave of Screams. Deep in the jungles of Belize, there is a place known as Midnight Terror Cave, or the Cave of Screams. Some very mysterious discoveries have been found inside of this spooky cave, including 9,566 human bones and fragments and discarded human teeth. According to Michael Prout, an archaeologist with California State University, most of the bones found inside of this terrifying cave belong to children under the age of 14. This has led researchers to believe the cave was used for hundreds and hundreds of child sacrifices. What nobody knows is why exactly these children were sacrificed in the first place. The cave was used by the ancient Maya civilization, who believed underground bodies of water were sacred. Prout and his team said that the Maya were sacrificing children to Chak, one of their gods, as they believed sacrificing the young would convince the god to bring them rain. And this wasn't something that just happened sometimes. It went on for centuries, and the dating method shows that the Maya would drop 1 to 3 bodies at a time into the deepest, darkest part of the cave near an underground stream. This represents the sacred space. Another similar site can be found at Chichen Itza, where there are also many remains from human sacrifices found in the sacred well. At least half of the victims were also children. The Aztec, the Maya, the Inca, and the Chimu all did this. But why? Hagen Klaus, a professor of anthropology at George Mason University, has proposed the theory that ancient people most likely did this as an act of desperation. He says that people sacrifice that which is of most and greatest value to them. They may have seen that adult sacrifice was ineffective. Maybe there was a need for a new type of sacrificial victim. The mummified tree dog. In 1980, a couple of loggers stumbled upon a very strange mummy while they were working to cut down a grove of chestnut trees in southern Georgia. After slicing one of the trees in half, to their shock, they found a dog mummified inside the hollow of the tree, petrified and in a state of decay. It looked like the dog had been inside the tree for about 20 years before they found him, though at the time nobody could figure out why in the world there was a dog literally stuck inside the tree. The unfortunate dog was nicknamed Stucky. It wasn't until experts examined the mummified dog carcass that they concluded it was probably a hunting dog that had lived in the 1960s, and the dog had likely chased a squirrel or something similar through a small hole in the roots of the tree, but had unfortunately got itself stuck in the middle with no way up and no way down. The dog had effectively wedged itself into its final resting place, and it likely died several days later from starvation. But here's the interesting part. Rather than decaying and returning to dust, the dog was perfectly preserved inside of the tree because no other animals could reach or smell the trapped canine. Chestnut oaks also contain tannins, which is commonly used in taxidermy to treat animal pelts to preserve them. It was a combination of factors that came into play to keep this dog perfectly safe to scare future loggers. Stucky can be seen today on display at the Southern Forest World Museum, still stuck inside the hollow of the tree. Poor guy. Yeti hair? In 1951, British mountaineer Eric Shipton came back from Mount Everest with a photograph he had taken of a giant's footprint in the snow. This became the origin for the Yeti, the great big abominable snowman that apparently lives in the Himalayas. Through the years, there have been a few different pieces of evidence found in relation to the supposed Yeti, but by far the most mysterious came from a 2014 study in which evolutionary biologists at the University of Buffalo analyzed samples of what was supposed to be the Yeti's hair. What they found was that the hair did in fact belong to a weird hybrid bear that was a mix between a polar bear and a brown bear. Perhaps the Yeti does indeed exist, but instead of being some sort of humanoid, it's a bizarre hybrid bear somehow living undetected in the Himalayan mountains. 9 samples of supposedly Yeti specimens were analyzed in another study after the first one, including bone, skin, hair, and teeth. These samples were collected from all over the Himalayas. They revealed no unusual findings, with all the Yeti samples coming back as the remains of either dogs or Asian black bears. Scientists are still searching for definitive proof of the Yeti, and if there truly is a weird hybrid bear living in the mountains, it has yet to be found. Pictish anvil. The Pictish people were a lost people that we know very little about. They were called the Picti, or the Painted People, by the Romans, and they were a confederation of tribes located in northern Scotland. In 2016, archaeologists found an unusual artifact on the island of Rousey, an anvil that is believed to be 1,500 years old. How does an anvil help? This ancient anvil still has sooty handprints and knee marks, and the location of where it was found helped prove that it was from the Pictish tribe. Archaeologists are amazed at the handprint because it is so personal. You can imagine the person who must have left it behind all those years ago. The anvil's find led to the discovery of a coppersmith's workshop. The site, called the Knowe of Swandro, also has a 5,000-year-old Neolithic tomb, Iron Age roundhouses, Pictish buildings, and a Viking settlement. Archaeologists are now racing to uncover everything they can because this place is being gradually swept out to sea, and everything they leave behind will be lost forever. Thor's Cave. In the Manifold Valley in England, there is a place known as Thor's Cave. It is a natural cavern on the side of a small mountain, and apparently it's haunted. The cave was first excavated in the 1860s, revealing ancient stone artifacts probably from the Neolithic era, as well as an ancient skeleton buried in an upright position in the clay of the cave floor that may have dated back to the Bronze Age. Other skeletal remains make this cave one of the oldest inhabited sites in the district. Explorers also found the remains of a bear species that is now extinct, as well as flint artifacts and bronze brooches. Besides all of these artifacts and things, the cave gives off a strange feeling and is believed to be haunted. There have been past reports of druids using the cave for strange pagan rituals, and there is the ghost of a lone Roman soldier said to haunt the entrance. People who had to spend the night there during a thunderstorm reported hearing loud bangs and explosions coming from the rock. Air was hissing and water began to rise, forming small streams and rivers in the cave. Then suddenly, flames. There is most likely a geological explanation, but try saying that at night, in the past, when you're stuck there during a storm. Nobody knows exactly what kind of bizarre things really went on here throughout the last few thousand years, but Thor's Cave continues to remain steeped in mystery, and it's not recommended to go camping in the area at night. Medieval skeleton rises from the grave. When a violent storm ravaged the coast of Ireland in 2018, a beech tree that had been growing for 215 years was ripped straight out of the ground. When the tree was knocked over, a mysterious skeleton was discovered tangled inside of its roots. Archaeologist Marian Dowd was called in to investigate this bizarre discovery, and what she found was that half the skeleton had been uprooted along with the tree, while the lower half of the skeleton was still stuck deep in the ground. Radiocarbon dating revealed that the young person buried beneath the tree had been between 17 and 20 when he died, sometime during the medieval period between 1030 and 1200. The young man had apparently suffered from a spinal joint disease, suggesting he had endured a lot of physical labor starting from a young age. But that's not what killed him. It looks like he had sustained several injuries from something sharp, probably a sword or a knife. Did he fight in battle, or was he murdered in cold blood? We'll probably never know the answers. The last thing that Dowd could determine was that he had been given a Christian burial, but no other bones or burial artifacts had been found in the area. And considering the tree was planted directly over the grave, chances are nobody knew the body was even there when the tree was planted over 200 years ago. There are rumors that there may be a church or a graveyard lost in the area, but no one has found anything yet. China's hanging coffins. There are some rather mysterious coffins anchored to the side of a limestone cliff about 100 feet up the side of a cave in southwestern China. These mysterious coffins are known as the Chinese hanging coffins. 30 of them hang at this particular location, but there are plenty of others scattered throughout China. Wang Hao Man has been chasing hanging coffins for the last 30 years, trying to discover the truth behind these strange burials. He found his first coffins in 1985 during an expedition up the Yangtze River. They were perched about 300 feet up the side of a cliff, and nobody really knew who had left them there. But the discoveries kept coming. There have been dozens and dozens of sites found with hanging coffins, with the burial boxes being either stuffed in crevices high up on the sides of mountains or just stacked up inside of caves. The oldest hanging coffins date back about 3,000 years, and they were found in the eastern province of Fujian. Of course, the biggest mystery is why the hanging coffins were placed there and how the ancient people managed to get the coffins so high up. Experts believe that they were left behind by the Bo or the Guyue people of China. There are other cultures that have done this as well, for example in the Philippines and Indonesia. The Bo people didn't believe in burying or burning their dead, and instead placed them as high as they could so their dead could reach the heavens. But what did the heaven mean to them? It's hard to understand their burial traditions, but hanging the coffins kept the remains out of reach of scavengers and also kept the ground clear for farming. Some of the coffins were filled with funeral goods and weighed over 100 pounds. They were brought up the sides of steep cliff faces and deposited in small holes in the rock. When Wang Hao Man finally managed to excavate some of the coffins, what he discovered was shocking. The coffins were not designed to hold one body. Instead, he found bones from many different people. Perhaps families were placed together over time. Today, the tradition is no longer practiced, but these coffins can teach us a lot about the ancient people of China who disappeared thousands of years ago. Zombies in Ireland. 2 medieval skeletons were recently dug up in Ireland, and archaeologists are saying that they very well could have been zombies. The skeletons date back to the 8th century, and they were discovered with huge stones wedged into their mouths. According to Chris Reed from the Institute of Technology in Ireland, who worked closely with the excavation team, the skeletons were probably buried with the stones wedged in their mouth because the local people were afraid that they would rise from their graves and feast on the living, just like zombies. The zombie remains were found near Lough Key in Ireland, along with 135 other human remains. However, archaeologists believe there are at least 3,000 additional skeletons buried in the area that have yet to be discovered. The 2 skeletons really stood out from the rest as something referred to as deviant burials. The stones had been forced so hard into their mouths that their jaws were basically dislocated. While these burials may seem similar to the vampire burials from Europe, this happened about 700 years earlier, before vampire legends had started to spread. Instead of vampires, the Irish were apparently scared of zombies. The girl in the backyard. A San Francisco contractor doing a bit of work in a client's backyard discovered a casket that contained the body of an unidentified little girl. The casket was made from metal and had 2 viewing windows in the lid, kind of like Sleeping Beauty. The casket was sealed, preserving the body of the girl inside, but the mystery here was that the coffin appeared to come from the 1800s, meaning it had been buried in the client's backyard for possibly 200 years. The discovery of the mysterious coffin became a huge story in San Francisco in 2016, but it wasn't until sometime later that DNA evidence uncovered the identity of the deceased. According to ABC News, the girl was identified as Edith Howard Cook, who died on October 13, 1876, at the young age of only 2. She had been buried in her family plot back in 1876, but that family plot later became the site of a residency in San Francisco's Lone Mountain neighborhood. All burials stopped in 1902. Most of the remains were exhumed and then transferred to a new cemetery, but apparently the body of Edith had been left behind. She stayed under the ground until the unfortunate contractor dug her up. The funeral home records from the 1800s showed the girl's cause of death as something known as marasmus, which is an old term used to describe undernourishment. Researchers have said that the awful conditions of urban living in the 1800s and possibly an infectious disease led to her ultimate death. The young girl has since been provided with a proper burial and grave plot in Colma's Green Lawn Cemetery. Mysterious river cubes. A magnet fisherman recently pulled 60 mysterious cubes out of a river in England. Nobody knows what they are, how they got into the river in the first place, or where they even came from. Each of the 60 cubes found by the fisherman and his sons depict what experts believe are sacred numerical inscriptions written in Sanskrit. The blocks appear to be made out of lead. They are small enough to hold between your finger and thumb, and each one is decorated with a neat grid and curious writings. As you can imagine, there was some confusion over what exactly the fisherman had found. In a desperate attempt to make some sense out of the cubes, he posted pictures of them to social media. He immediately got some responses, and it turned out that the cubes may have been connected to a type of Hindu prayer ritual. They definitely appeared Indian in origin, and the writings on them could have been incantations used for prayers, which were only effective when throwing the cube into running water. Of course, there is still the mystery of how Indian prayer cubes got lost in a rural English river, as well as just how long they have been there. The buried ship. The last place anyone expected to find a buried ship was underneath Ground Zero, but when construction began on the One World Trade Center, deep underground, workers once again hit something surprising. It was the hull of a ship underneath the ground where the New York City World Trade Center once stood. The boat had been buried underneath the center for 200 years, and not a single person knew it was there. According to CNN, the boat has since been traced back to Philadelphia and the colonial era. Research done by the Tree Ring Research Laboratory helped to date the ship using the rings and the white oak from its frame. They figured out that the wood was probably cut down in 1773. However, how exactly the ship became buried in the middle of New York is a whole different matter altogether. It was found about 22 feet underground, inside of what was once the bottom of a river. The ship was probably used for between 20 and 30 years, sailing along lower Manhattan until at some point it sank and floated to the bottom of the river. Then it was eventually covered over by trash and fill material that was used to extend the shoreline of Manhattan in a big project to expand the island. Many years later, the World Trade Center was built on top. Egyptian Mummy Workshop. While performing some ordinary archaeological digs near the Unas Pyramid in Memphis, the old capital of ancient Egypt, experts stumbled upon an extraordinarily rare and very unexpected discovery. They found a mummification workshop that dates back 2,500 years. The workshop had likely been used in rituals to embalm and prepare dead bodies for mummification and their journey into the afterlife. The workshop was found with an embalmer's toolkit, including pottery vessels, measuring cups, and other interesting paraphernalia. The workshop was probably used between 664 and 404 BC, and archaeologists are now hoping that they can learn more about the embalming process and mummification from the 26th dynasty. Head of the mission, Ramadan Hussein, told reporters that the workshop is a gold mine of information. Many of the embalmer's leftover artifacts should be able to help modern scientists figure out the chemical composition of many of the oils used in the mummification process. There were even mummy masks discovered and silver masks from Egyptian priests, along with jars that would have been used to keep organs inside after they were extracted from the dead. The Sarmatian warrior woman. Russian archaeologists have unearthed a very impressive tomb with some serious historical significance. They discovered the tomb of a Sarmatian female warrior who apparently worshipped fire. The tomb was discovered complete with 100 arrowheads, a collection of knives, a sword, and a horse harness. All of these artifacts have led researchers to believe the woman was a warrior. She was also found with gems, gold, and other jewelry that indicates a high social status. If you're not sure who the Sarmatians were, they were nomadic people who lived between the 5th century BC and the 4th century AD throughout Moldova and Ukraine, as well as Russia and Iran. These were not to be confused with the Scythians. The Sarmatians were different in that they worshipped a god of fire instead of a god of nature, and of course they had a few other cultural differences. The women often fought alongside the men in war and battle. If they were married, they would be buried along with their spouses. According to experts working with the Institute of Archaeology at the Russian Academy of Sciences, there were 29 burial mounds accidentally discovered during the construction of a new airport. The construction crews clearing out the large area came across many of these mounds that were already in bad shape. Most of the tombs had already been pillaged, and so finding the warrior's tomb fully intact and full of artifacts was a huge surprise. What's your favorite ancient civilization that not many people know about? Let me know in the comments below. Indigenous ritual pillar. Some unexpected historical treasure was recently discovered on a beach in Victoria, Vancouver Island. A pillar that apparently belonged to a local indigenous group was found by a person wandering along Dallas Road Beach at low tide. According to the Royal BC Museum, the pillar was indeed a genuine indigenous artifact. It was believed to be a Lekwungen ritual stone pillar used in ancient ceremonies such as puberty rites, feeding of the dead, and to celebrate the first salmon. After its initial discovery, indigenous leaders in the area became very excited about it. The chief of the Songhees Nation told local news media that the discovery of the pillar was a clear reminder of the long history of the indigenous people living in the region. As for where exactly the artifact came from, it was initially believed that it had been perched on a seaside cliff, but at some point in the 20th century, it had fallen into the ocean, where it eventually appeared on the shore. However, the excitement soon turned to controversy when a local artist came forward to say that it was not actually an artifact at all, but simply a piece of stone that he had carved for fun. The First Nations elders were not able to see the pillar for themselves due to COVID restrictions, and the artist could not be reached for comment. The local museum was forced to go back and properly test the statue to see how old it truly was, and as of right now, the whole thing has turned into a local disaster. The museum has reported that they have worked with the First Nations for many years and seem to have good reason to suggest the pillar was from the territory. For now, the pillar is being hidden away until they can figure it out. The head of Hermes. Roadwork in Athens uncovered yet another outstanding archaeological treasure. This wasn't a mummy or a secret tomb, it was instead the severed head of Hermes. Of course, it wasn't a real head of flesh and bone, but the likeness of the Greek messenger god. The head was found underneath Aeolus Street, which in ancient Greece would have been at the very heart of the bustling city of Athens, and to this day is a public thoroughfare used by pedestrians. Naturally, this street has been excavated before. One of the most impressive finds was in 1885, when the statue of Hercules was discovered just across the street from where road workers accidentally found the head of Hermes. Hercules was found naked with a lion slung over his left shoulder. His statue is currently on display at the National Archaeological Museum. There are probably dozens and dozens of broken statues and lost relics buried underneath this single street, seeing as it has been around basically since Athens was founded. However, it would be impossible to dig up the entire road and see everything that has been lost to time. This small bit of construction managed to find one head of one god that had been separated from the rest of its body. The workers didn't manage to find the rest of the statue. Still, the Ministry of Culture is working hard to restore Hermes' head to its former glory. The Puffin Island Rabbit Hole. The small island of Stockholm off the coast of Wales was a popular tourist destination before the pandemic, but with no visitors going to the island, its caretakers didn't have much to do. So one day, while wandering the island, one of the caretakers found a prehistoric tool from the Stone Age sitting inside of a rabbit hole. The tool ended up dating back 9,000 years and was probably used for either cracking shellfish open or for preparing seal hides. But the fun didn't stop there. The next day, a burial urn dating back almost 4,000 years was found inside of the same rabbit hole. This is nothing short of incredible, especially since the island has basically been uninhabited for hundreds of years. The island is currently used as a bird observatory with no proper residents other than the two caretakers. The Vikings inhabited the island during the 10th or 11th centuries, but now it turns out that human habitation of Stockholm Island goes way further back. As of right now, nobody has any idea who these ancient people may have been, though they could have been using the island for hunting seals. The mysterious box. Workers in the east of China were trying to widen a road in the city of Taizhou when they came across the strangest discovery ever. The road workers were about 6 feet below the surface when they hit something solid. It turned out to be a buried tomb. Professional archaeologists had to be called in to investigate the mystery, and what they discovered was a hidden chamber underneath the city streets dating back 700 years. Encased inside the stone tomb was a slightly smaller wooden box, and inside of the box was the mummy of a woman soaking in a bloody red liquid and buried under layers of fabric and clothing. It was absolutely bizarre, The coffin had somehow been encased nearly 1,000 years ago, and the body of the woman inside was almost perfectly preserved. Experts have since claimed her to be a prominent member of the Ming dynasty. She was found wearing extremely expensive jewelry and wrapped in very expensive garments. As of right now, nobody has managed to identify the woman. She's been transferred into the care of professional archaeologists and will be going on display at a local museum in China. More Dead Sea Scrolls. The original Dead Sea Scrolls are said to have been found completely by accident by a sheep herder in some caves near the Dead Sea of Israel. That was back in 1947, and they are still one of the most important archaeological finds of the 20th century. But now there's more! The Israel Antiquities Authority recently announced in late 2020 that even more of these mysterious biblical scrolls have just been found in the Judean desert. And it's the first time that additional fragments of Dead Sea Scrolls have been found in over 60 years. The findings came while Israel authorities were checking out a desert cave system, but they had never imagined that they would find even more amazing relics. All they were doing this time was running a typical survey of desert caves and ravines, a survey that has been going on since 2017. It was assumed that all the Dead Sea Scrolls were already taken by thieves or looters, and that there was nothing big left to find. Archaeologists were looking for tiny things that looters may have missed. The missing pieces of the Dead Sea Scrolls were found inside of what has been called the Cave of Horror. 20 fragments were discovered, and now the number has gone up to 80, all dating back to the 1st century AD. Some of the fragments include texts from the Book of the 12 Minor Prophets, written in Greek. They might be missing pieces from a larger group of scroll fragments found in the Cave of Horror. But why is it called that? When it was discovered in 1952, the cave was filled with the remains of 40 men, women, and children, all of which had apparently been hiding from the Romans back between 132 and 136 AD. These people had likely starved to death hiding in the cave. Also, the only way to get inside the cave is by spelunking 262 feet below a cliff using climbing equipment. Definitely a thrill for archaeologists who want to spice up their day. Thanks for watching! What's the craziest thing you've ever found by accident? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. See you soon! Bye!